Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John O'Sullivan. I'm the president of the Danube Institute. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this, I think, important conference, Partners in Eastern Europe, Multiple Crossroads. The topics being politics and the rule of law in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. It's been about 30 years ago, I was involved through helping to set up the New Atlantic Initiative and trying to involve the countries of Central and Eastern Europe in the institutions of the Euro-Atlantic community. In that very pleasant and interesting experience, I met the first generation of young reformers in government, civil society, and to some extent also because of NATO's important role in the military. I was very struck by their dedication and idealism and by the success that they achieved at a young age. Well, many of them have gone on to great distinction in careers in politics and civil society and business and diplomacy. But I think I'm seeing this morning, I'm seeing a second generation of reformers and of advocates of the rule of law and democracy in this part of the world and in the three countries we're talking about. We in the Danube Institute are committed to working with people in these countries to help to solve their problems, to create circumstances in which mutual advice and best practice ideas can be exchanged, and in criticizing what's going wrong. So it's to me a great pleasure to be peripherally involved in this. I say peripherally because my colleague Naomi Karani is really the person who's done most of the organizing and heavy lifting on this occasion. I would like to say how grateful I am to see some old friends here, like Professor Gianoda and Kalmal Mijay, and some new ones as well, whom you will meet in the course of the morning. But this is an important topic. It's one that the rest of the world, the rest of Europe first, but the rest of the world too, in the United States particularly, needs to know and understand more about. I'm delighted that we in the Institute are able to play some role in making this information and the perspectives of people in the region much more available. So I'm going to now hand over to my colleague, Naomi Karani, and I look forward to being a learning member of the audience.
Thank you, John. I'm not holding a great speech. I just would like to welcome you all at our conference. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. As some of you may know, we organized a large conference on Ukraine, on the Ukrainian elections back in April, with a very distinguished panel of politicians and experts. And now we'd like to draw attention to the wider region. We have invited very distinguished experts from 3 countries out of the 6 Eastern Partnership countries. We are convinced and hopeful that these 3 countries, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, can serve as a model for the whole region in constructing a stable democracy and rule of law. I'm very grateful to Kalmal Mijay for the idea of the conference. There is no better expert in Hungary on this region, so we are very happy to have him involved in this conference. Last year, very important developments took place in these countries. As you may or may not know, in Georgia, there have been large demonstrations going on for many months. Moldova had a short-lived government that fell approximately a month ago. And if you don't know about it, it is because hardly anything is reported in the news about these countries, unfortunately. On the contrary, Ukraine has been in the news, but unfortunately mostly in connection with the President Trump's impeachment process. And I'm sure that this is an attention that Ukraine would have saved or spared itself. This is not the kind of attention these countries deserve. And regardless of what we think of the impeachment process, it is safe to say that it has definitely and deeply damaged the US policy towards Ukraine. This and the West's lack of attention to the smaller countries of this region only benefits Russia, who can sit back, relax, and enjoy the show while trying to draw these countries back to its own orbit. When we started to organize this conference with Kalman, we didn't know that today would be the day of a Normandy summit, a long-awaited one. There hasn't been one for many years, or several years now. And also, we did not know, or we couldn't tell, that there would be a Hungarian commissioner in charge of neighborhood and enlargement in the person of Oliver Várhelyi. This makes the conference even more timely in drawing attention to the region and to these three countries who have been making a lot of effort in progressing towards EU-Atlantic integration. We are very grateful to the distinguished experts who have accepted our invitation, and we hope to be able to work with you in the longer run as well. I'd like to thank Gábor Zubko, the head of delegation of the EU Commission in Hungary, and I'm giving him the floor for his opening words. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, let me thank you for the Danube Institute for the kind invitation and for organizing this very timely conference. Multiple crossroads says the title of the conference, and indeed, major changes have taken place, and I can even say it in present, taking place this year in the eastern neighborhood of the European Union, and these developments were deeper examination and discussion about the direction of reforms or non-reforms in these countries. And of course, this conference focuses three of those countries, and you all know that European Union has a policy initiative concerning that area, which concerns also these countries, the Eastern Partnership. The Eastern Partnership aims to deepen and strengthen relations between the Union and its member states and its 6 eastern neighbors, among them Georgia, Republic of Moldova, and Ukraine, the countries in the focus of today's conference. I don't have to much highlight for you, because you are the experts of the region, which are the aims, but just a warm-up in this bit foggy morning. The partnership concentrates on economy, governance, connectivity, society, with deliverables like more engagement with civil society organization, improve the investment and business environment, or enhance energy efficiency, so various fields. But of course, one of the special focus is rule of law. The partnership has a special attention on the programs reinforcing rule of law in these countries. Scaling up efforts in the area of strengthening institutions and good governance is top priority for the partnership, ambitioning progress towards independent, specialized anti-corruption bodies, taking forward judicial and public administration reforms. Success at these fields is a precondition to build citizens' trust in the state, long-term stability, and an investment-safe climate and investment-safe environment, which is in the interest of these countries and societies. This year, in 2019, the Eastern Partnership celebrated its 10 years anniversary. Over the past decade, the collective efforts of the EU and the partner countries have brought considerable benefits to the citizens, including more trade, mobility, increased economic development, and a better quality of life. On the occasion, on the 10th anniversary, reports spoke about the success of the partnership in achieving the mentioned concrete results for citizens, but also recognized the challenges that remain. More critical analysts question whether the mechanism and leverage employed by the partnership is sufficient to sustain long-lasting reforms. While it is clear that after 10 years of close cooperation, the joint work of all partners is not finished, it needs a reflection period about the future of this partnership. Implementation of reforms and delivery of tangible results for citizens will remain a key priority. However, with 2020 approaching, it is equally important to look critically at the challenges and to reflect on how to ensure that the Eastern Partnership and the programs concerning these countries remain relevant, effective, efficient. The Commission started and implemented a broad and inclusive structured consultation process to reflect on the future strategic direction of the partnership and the new post-2020 generation of deliverables. The inputs received to this consultation will be now analyzed under a new leadership at the institutions, specifically under the responsibility of High Representative Vice President Borrell and, as mentioned, Commissioner Várhelyi. In one of his first public appearances, Oliver Várhelyi, Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, said last Thursday at the annual assembly organized by the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum that reviving civil society and economy by reaching out to youth would be his priority in the context of Eastern Partnership. He added that one of his priorities is to create an economy, a sound, reliable, robust economy for these countries. At the same time, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen defined the new Commission as a geopolitical Commission, and one of the Commission's new political guidelines is aiming at a stronger Europe in the world, for what the European Commission champions multilateralism and a rule-based global order through a more active role and stronger voice for the EU in the world. While it would be too early for me to speak about the possible new directions of the partnership or the new directions for the program, from the statements of the new leaders of the Commission and other European institutions, it is clear that the European Union will be increasingly committed to the original aims of the partnership, which is fully valid to the three countries in the focus of today's conference, building a common area of shared democracy, prosperity, and stability. Ladies and gentlemen, major changes in these countries, changes and reflection process in the institutions, but with a full commitment to the original aims of the partnership. It clearly shows that the conference and today's conference is very timely and very relevant. So, with these words, I wish you fruitful discussion for today. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to present the first panel here. My name is Anton Benderzewski. I will be the moderator of this session. And the session will be about the political changes, the political events this year in Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. Let me ask speakers to come to the table. We have three distinguished speakers for this panel. Vlad Dubrovsky, who is a senior economist of CASE Ukraine. He will be representing Ukraine. Gia Nodia, who is a professor at Ilia State University and founder and the chairman of Caucasus Institute for Peace, Georgia. And Andrei Popov, who is a diplomat, a journalist, and the president of Moldovan Institute for Strategic Initiatives, Chisinau. Our speakers, we have around 10 to 15 minutes to introduce their thoughts on the topic, on the political events this year in their countries, with the emphasis of emphasizing how these political changes led, or if they led to any systematic change, any progress in democracy, development, and rule of law. So this session will focus on political developments, and then we have a break, and the second session will focus with Kama Mijai, will focus on the rule of law in these respected countries. So on this note, I would like to ask our first speaker, Vlad, to come and make his thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with my presentation, which is about the prospects of the rule of law in the light of the elections and their results. So the rule of law is a very simple and natural thing. Why don't the people behave according to the rules? Why don't an independent and impartial law enforcement enforce those rules, because those rules are in the interests of all? So there are some rules. There are some rules that benefits everybody, and so there are some violators. And if the violators are numerous, then of course each violator is better off if he or she breaks the rules. But at the end, they come to bad equilibrium in which there is no rules and everybody is worse off. And this equilibrium is unfortunately sustainable, because if some player tries to behave by the rules, then he is even worse off, even more worse off than the others. So he rationally decides not to obey the rules. This is sustainable Nash equilibrium. And in this equilibrium, lack of rule of law makes breaking the rules rational for everybody. So it's again, sustainable equilibrium. It looks like this. So if everybody enters the crossroads, then we have a gridlock. And then we need somebody who will sort it out. And this somebody is called patron. And Henry Hale, whose book was recommended to me by Kalman Mizhi, and I will pass his recommendations to you, described the politics of the countries like our three countries and all of the countries of Eurasia, so-called Eurasia, the former Soviet Union without Baltics, and many other countries in the world as patronalism or patronal politics. How does it work? These patrons form a pyramid. So there is a big patron, some smaller patrons, seniors and vassals, and they form a social network with horizontal and vertical linkages. And the whole politics, the whole political process can be presented as an interaction of such pyramids. Not the ideas, not the big parties organized by some transparent rules, but these personal pyramids. And they usually gravitate to a single pyramid, like the one which was built by Putin in Russia, or by Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan, or by Aliyevs in Azerbaijan, and so on. And in Ukraine, we also had such experience. For example, Yanukovych tried to build his own pyramid. Kuchma successfully has built his own pyramid. And how does it work? Why it is sustainable? Because if somebody goes against the leader, it is marked by red, then leader gives an order for punishment, and this order is being executed because justice is selected. Justice is, all of the justice is ruled by the leader. And so order is executed. If order is not executed, then those who will not execute this order will be punished by themselves. And which means that as long as the leader has a right and ability to distribute punishments and rewards arbitrarily, then his subdues believe that they will be punished for disloyalty or rewarded for your loyalty, and they obey the orders. If only they do not have such a belief, the pyramids crash. So this is the essence of patronal politics. It is based on self-fulfilling expectations. Now, what happens if an independent independent court is introduced in this system. Like for example, this very well-known example with Ukrainian anti-corruption court, to which our previous President Poroshenko was very angry and said that there is no anti-corruption courts in any country in the world. Why do you impose it on us and so on? Because if there is an independent court, then this order for punishment is not being executed automatically. Whatever the leader says, the court can rule differently, and so the leader just loses the power because of independent justice. If the disloyalty is not punished, then it spreads across the pyramid, and the pyramid crashes. So it does not only threaten the leader because he is or she is afraid of criminal prosecution, but it also threatens the power of a leader as such. And it is much more important factor than any else. And it explains why it is so hard to introduce the rule of law and break this bad equilibrium that I have described in the beginning. So, can Zelensky be a leader that brings the rule of law in Ukraine? Every leader, as I have said, if he or she is within the personal politics, has a conflict of interest. And it's very hard to expect that he or she will bring the rule of law. But Zelensky, unlike all of his predecessors, came from nowhere. He came from business, from entertainment, and so on. And for this reason, he has no interest in preserving the system, no rational interest, because he is weak within the system. He has his own pyramid, and if he uses the other's pyramid, as for example provided by oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, then he becomes hostage of the owner of this pyramid. And of course, for an ambitious leader, it is a very bad situation. He would not do it voluntarily. And he is the first leader that has real interest in strengthening the informal institutions. In the formal institutions, again, the informal, not the other way around. Because he cannot rely on informal institutions. But the problem is that his personal skills and personal attitudes are unfortunately very much of the old system. So he likes personal connections. He appoints only the people to whom he trusts. He thinks in terms of his team and the others. And he tries to replicate some Lukashenko-style behavior, just populistic behavior when he, as a president, gives orders to some representative of the local communities and so on. So all of this is against this opportunity. Also, his dependence on Kolomoisky, we hope that it is just temporary. But it can be based on something beyond our understanding, for example, some compromise, some other things that could make him indeed dependent on Kolomoisky for all of his tenure. So this is the first chance to introduce the rule of law in Ukraine, but you know, Ukraine never misses a chance to miss a chance. So we still do not know if it will work or not. The rational arguments it will work, the others that it will not. What is going on now? Of course, we have absolutely new people in power, which is good. We have changes that speeded up tremendously, so-called turbo regime in the parliament, when many laws that were pending for years are being approved. But given the severe lack of skills of this team, this process is often misused by lobbyists, by some people with bad intentions. As, for example, now we have a scandal about tobacco companies and retail lobbying against tobacco companies and so on. Lack of clear program, lack of clear ideology, no preparation because the team was completely unprepared for taking the power, leads to very inconsistent policies. And this is also dangerous because the policies sometimes contradict to each other. Civil society are involved, but they are not heard. They are not listened to. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. Sometimes they went to the parliament and had even some parliament committees, but there is no systemic process of interaction between civil society and the power. And the most problematic thing is that Zelensky managed for the first time to make a majority in the Verkhovna Rada. The Ukrainian voter gave him such an opportunity, but it means that traditional Ukrainian checks and balances are as weak as they never be. Because actually the president controls all of the branches of power. It provides for some opportunities, but it brings huge risks. And all of this means that there is huge risk of fatal mistake. Today is a very decisive day. We have Normandy format meeting in Paris, and if our president will make a fatal mistake here, then it could be really fatal not only for him, but for Ukraine too. And I'm afraid that even if he will do right today, then there is no guarantee that there will be no other fatal mistakes. So there is still an optimistic scenario because there are some rational motives for Zelensky to be positive. And this scenario implies, first of all, conflict with Kolomoisky, because I know no big country with plural oligarchs in which the president elected with high majority would be dependent on the one single oligarch. I see Georgian colleagues looking at me, but Georgia is very small. And in Georgia, the oligarch Ivanishvili came not from Georgia, he came from Russia. He amassed his wealth in Russia. And so he is much wealthier than any Georgian businessman could be, just because of the scale. In Ukraine, this is hopefully, so far it is different. And so I think that this conflict is almost inevitable, also because it is rational for a president to become arbiter over all of the oligarchs, not the partner with one of them. And then this mono-coalition, it will inevitably split, but if it will split by ideological lines, then it will beget ideological parties in the future. And then, I already said that Zelensky will be interested in developing the formal institutions, and he can use modern media technologies to educate the people, in which he has a very big advantage. For instance, like making shows, making some entertainment, educating, enlightening the voters will be a very good idea. And then I think that by the end of the term, it would be rational for him to introduce some checks and balances, because it will make the system sustainable. And it will also somehow secure him from persecution of his successors. There is also a pessimistic scenario. If he fails to part with Kolomoisky, he fails also to become arbiter of the oligarchs. The coalition will be split inevitably, but by oligarchs. There will be just groups controlled by different oligarchs. This process already started. Fatal mistakes will be mounted and finally lead to a crisis. And in this crisis, he can eventually take the optimistic way, but without this huge rating, without many allies, probably without macroeconomic stability, and so on. And so the chances for success will be much lesser. This is a sort of intermediate scenario of early elections with unpredictable results. And unfortunately, there is also a catastrophic scenario, most pessimistic scenario, actually the Kremlin scenario, in which he will be ousted from power by a coup, and then Putin will receive casus belli for intervention in Ukraine. I hope that everybody is aware of this scenario, including his political competitors, including Zelensky himself. And so there is a hope that if everybody is aware, then they will somehow prevent it. And finally, the most strange thing is I see no intermediate scenario. Normally, intermediate scenario is the most probable one. But now it could be heaven or it could be hell. The intermediate scenarios are unfortunately unstable. And thanks for your attention. I will be ready to answer your questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Vlad, for your insights on the situation in Ukraine. I would like to ask our next speaker, Professor Gianodia, to make an interpretation of Georgia's event in 2019.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for your interest. Now, how can I summarize what's happening in Georgia? I will start maybe with some contrast with Ukraine and Moldova. 1 year approximately ago, CEPS, a Brussels-centered European think tank, published a study accomplished by myself together with my Ukrainian and Moldovan colleagues, which somehow made some systemic comparison between the three countries. And there we focused mostly on similarities, despite obvious differences between the three countries. And one of the greatest similarities, kind of key common topic, was so-called state capture by oligarchic actors. I mean, group of oligarchs in Ukraine or single individual oligarchs in Moldova and Georgia. Of course, there were many other things to discuss. 1 year later, I can only focus on differences between Georgia on the one hand and Moldova and Ukraine on the other hand, because in Moldova and Georgia, in the meantime, there were government changes, power changes through elections. And there are new governments, and the discussion there is refocused on what this new government will do or not do, as Mr. Dubrovsky just discussed with regards to Ukraine. It's also, there is not great celebration of the very fact of electoral power change. It's not portrayed as something extraordinary. It's something almost routine occurrence. So it's not the main thing that power change, but what it means for the prospect of systemic change or lack of systemic change in these countries. That's what we are discussing here and what Kalman urges us to focus on. In Georgia, we are on a very different stage in our political cycle. That last year was not about change. When I thought how to summarize Georgian situation in these 10 or 15 minutes, I thought that I have to focus on keywords, not my keywords, but keywords which are in the air and which everybody uses in Georgia now. So what are these keywords? I would say crisis is number one keyword, which is very popular word in Georgia. Now everybody speaks of crisis. Okay, government denies it, but everybody else maybe. Stagnation, also a popular keyword. Uncertainty, we don't know what will happen, and everybody is asking each other, what will happen? And nobody can answer, of course. If we use adjectives, then it's tumultuous, I would say. The center of political life moved to the streets, starting from summer, and still there is no way back from the streets to kind of normal parliamentary politics is yet clear. Also there have been kind of alternation of hope and pessimism, optimism, pessimism, although on the balance, I think there were some optimistic months, let's say, or weeks, but on the balance, I think pessimism prevails. And now, as I said, the overall keyword is state capture, which became very, very popular. So everybody uses this word now in debates about Georgia. Okay, it's not new necessarily. Not something that happened this year or previous year. I use personally, it's not so popular, more general word following Thomas Carothers of dominant power politics, which has been kind of a syndrome, a feature of Georgian politics for last 25 years maybe, which means that the power is captured or dominated by a small group, single group of people, led by one strong leader, which also sets us apart from Ukraine and Moldova, where there was always some kind of, greater pluralism within power. That has always been like that, basically. We had this Shevardnadze era, Saakashvili era, now we have Ivanishvili era. So one could also speak about some kind of state capture then. But in this case, the state capture occurred through money, mainly, so it's more kind of plutocracy. It's not as popular term as oligarchy, but oligarchy would not be correct word because oligarchy suggests a group of people. It's rule of the few. Here is the rule of the one person, and his rule is based on his personal fortune. So, and there is still no end visible, no way out of this is yet visible. But what I mentioned about cycle, it's also important. I personally considered this state capture on the second day of elections in 2012 when Georgian Dream came to power, but I was considered kind of a biased person having been close to previous government, so that's why he talks about that. I think most people were hopeful at that time. So we have these cycles, and there is cycle of hope and cycle of pessimism in general. And years after this Georgian Dream government came to power, several years after that, there was a period of hope. So quite a few reasonable people expected some significant progress under Ivanishvili's government. Not that they liked Ivanishvili personally so much, but there were also quite reasonable people within government who were driving reforms, and Georgian civil society gave sort of mixed assessments to Georgian government then, saying that there are bad things, negative things, but they are trying to do something good, and actually the At that time, some reforms in the judiciary got also quite good reviews within Georgian civil society, but also by our partners in Europe or America, and also in business kind of environment. We were moving up on doing business rankings and some other rankings, so that was considered sort of hopeful years. And critics like myself were considered, oh, they are biased and one-sided. Now I think we have passed that. Now all civil society is considered by government as an enemy, and as part of the opposition, basically part of the Saakashvili's team. That's what Mr. Ivanishvili says directly on TV, and actually IRI and NDI also, American organizations, Saakashvili's team. That's kind of official message box of the government now. And also as a result of several types of defections or expulsions sometimes, people, kind of reform-minded people from within the Georgian Dream also left. So now, especially after this last scandal on which I will talk very soon, some people joke that there are no English speakers left in Georgian Dream anymore. Nobody speaks English in the Georgian Dream. Of course, that's a symbolic thing, and a couple of people do speak English, but it means that people who, are, motivated to reform Georgia in the direction of, rule of law and democracy, etc., they are usually people who have had some personal contact with the West through studying or working or doing something like that, and there have always been people in the Georgian Dream who are like that. And now there are almost basically nobody left like that. So there is this, and also our Western partners, I think there have never been such kind of such clear, sustained criticism of the Georgian government from our Western partners as it had been after its last scandal. But this does not, so in that sense, the government is really in survival mode. Next year we expect parliamentary elections, the crucial elections. Now we are parliamentary system, president does not matter, it's parliament, it is all that matters. So either Georgian Dream stays or it's out, and we don't know. It's one of the points of uncertainty how it will be, but of course Georgian Dream wants to stay, and is prepared to go at some lengths, including things that are not really legal, to stay. So that's, but it's not guaranteed. Maybe a kind of different forces in the opposition mobilize enough to vote them out. So we have this, that's main thing to look at. But it's not only about survival, wish of survival of Ivanishvili on his money, which works for the Georgian Dream. Georgian Dream still is in polls, in real polls, kind of #1 party. It's not majority party, so it looks like it can, in honest elections, it can hope for 1/3 of the vote or more, and it's still #1 party. So the second party is the United National Movement, basically Mikhail Saakashvili's party, who was the previous president, which may hope for maybe 25%, something like that. But of course, UNM plus other opposition parties would have much more than the Georgian Dream. So why, what drives this support, remaining support for the Georgian Dream? Of course, part is inertia, part is, just that people want calm and don't want upheaval. And I think government plays that card, that we are a force for stability. But the most important thing is some fear of the return of previous government, of Saakashvili. Of course, Saakashvili has very, very committed followers, but he has even more committed haters. And these committed haters are the main, real, genuine support group of Georgian Dream. So all electoral campaigns of Georgian Dream, starting from 2012 when they came to power, was about, demonizing Saakashvili and his group as kind of autocratic, anti-Georgian, and basically party of war with Russia. So and that works to some extent. It works if anything does. So in that sense, this government, after 8 years, almost 7 years being in government, they are still opposition to Saakashvili in terms of their rhetoric. So, and about this year, I think this was, if we want kind of a catchy title to the story of this year, this is the year of 3 big scandals. So we moved from one to second to the third. One was about independent judiciary. I know Eka will talk about that more after the break, but okay, one should understand that when, lack of independent judiciary was one of the most obvious defects, weaknesses of previous government. Previous government was successful in many ways, in reforming many ways. It was successful in removing corruption from the courts as well. That was part of its success, but the court was really fully pliant. It was more competent, but fully pliant to the government. Whenever government wanted something, some kind of decision, it delivered the decision. And there were genuine hopes that with Ivanishvili's government, things would change. But it gradually became clear that he likes pliant courts. So these same justices, it's not like in America, some justices are Republican or Democrats. These justices believe in doing government's bidding, whoever the government is. It's their deep conviction that you should serve the government of the day. And current government likes that. Why not, right? To have a kind of court which obeys you. And somehow it creates disappointment for everybody else who is not government, because we want independent court judiciary. It's important, and Mr. Dubrovsky talked about that. But it's obvious. So, and in the late December of last year and January, there were hearings on appointing in Parliament. Parliament appoints Supreme Court justices. Everybody else is appointed by kind of conference of judges, but Supreme Court justices are appointed for life by Parliament. And somehow it became obvious that these justices, who were most notorious for their kind of unprincipled, unscrupulous decisions in favor of government, doing government bidding, they would become Supreme Court justices forever, basically, for life. And most of them are quite young. So that caused real outrage, and this caused outrage actually within part of Georgian Dream. So more than 10 members of the Georgian Dream defected as a result. And quite a few others were about to defect, and somehow they were cajoled or convinced to stay. And so they postponed the decision. They did not say that they were doing something fundamentally wrong, but under pressure, they postponed. So the process is still underway. We are still, see on television hearings of those justices, but we still presume that Georgian Dream wants to persist in its wish to continue. The second scandal, June scandal, was about Russia. So there was this Mr. now big star in Georgia, Mr. Sergei Gavrilov, who is Russian communist MP, who is great champion of Orthodox religion. Now that's another great paradox about Russia, that communists become the greatest defenders of Orthodox religion. But of course they see it purely geopolitically, because Russia is a third Rome, and Orthodoxy is its geopolitical tool, first of all. It's not really about religion. And Russia, I mean, Greeks created it, but Russians took over some kind of interparliamentary assembly of orthodoxy, of Orthodox countries, chaired by this Mr. Gavrilov. And this Mr. Gavrilov was chairing one of the sessions in Tbilisi from the actual physical chair of Speaker of Parliament. And that Georgians saw as a kind of symbolic affront, because Russia occupies 20% of Georgia's territory. It's an existential threat to Georgia's sovereignty, and this government put this guy in the speaker's chair. And of course, it was not just about Mr. Gavrilov or just symbolism. It was about suspicion that this government, even though it is kind of all for European integration and NATO integration, ostensibly, that really they are kind of, they have pro-Russian leanings. It was mentioned that Mr. Ivanishvili's money comes from Russia, so basically Georgian state was bought with Russian money. Now this year, Ivanishvili also brought Mr. Gacharia as prime minister, and Mr. Gacharia also made his career in Russia. So people who became somebody in Russia, both are now two key figures in Georgian politics. So there are this, I think many people in opposition believe that there is some hidden pro-Russian agenda in the Georgian government. And that caused outrage, and that caused really huge demonstrations, and the government was scared. Speaker of Parliament resigned. The actual organizer of this event in the parliament actually gave up his mandate, even parliamentary mandate. And unexpectedly, for some people, there were, I mean, if you have big rally, you also demand other things, not just something related to this Gavrilov affair. And Georgian opposition and civil society had been demanding moving to a proportional voting system for the long time, and this huge rally also demanded that, and government gave in by promising, giving firm promise that we will move to this fully proportional system of, I know that's my last scandal. That was the period of hope that, okay, we achieved something really important. I mean, who cares who is Speaker of Parliament, but proportional system is very important. I will explain very shortly now. But in November, and everybody was absolutely sure, including many members of Georgian Dream, that promise is very firm. If Ivanishvili promised, he will not really renege on his words. But he did. And in Parliament, in November, Parliament rejected this. And it was a kind of rebellion of majoritarian MPs. But basically everybody, almost everybody, believes that it was kind of staged. And that caused another kind of outrage, and politics again moved to the streets and still stays in the streets, I would say. So why was it so important? And that's where I finish. Okay, it's very simple. If there are mixed system, now we have mixed system, almost half of MPs are voted in through single mandate constituencies, and a little bit more than half through proportional. And if we keep the system, Georgian Dream has a good chance to getting majority in parliament. If we move to proportional, Georgian Dream basically has no chances to get majority. It can get plurality, it will probably get plurality, but not majority. So it is, the difference is about between losing power and sustaining power. What is better? So, of course, Georgian Dream, Ivanishvili thought that this would cause a crisis now, reneging on the promise, but better crisis now than losing power in 1 year. So that's quite obvious calculation. And so we do have crisis. Basically, all opposition, including most pro-Russian groups, are opposing this. Of course, all civil society is opposing this. All international community is openly criticizing Georgian Dream for this very step. And now we also had it's basically the West forced or imposed upon government this need to negotiate with the opposition, because they said, oh, it's closed. We are sorry that this happened, But now its issue is closed. But actually, yeah, and 13 MPs from the Georgian Dream, which includes basically all reform-minded people within the Georgian Dream, also defected and moved over to the opposition. So, all parliamentary opposition gave up, boycotts the sessions of parliament. So it will be very difficult to go back in a face-saving way unless government concedes something. So now we are in the middle of this process. Another meeting was yesterday. So the opposition cannot gather crowds large enough to force government to concessions, but government cannot bring people in parliament, and they dispersed crowds several times through water cannons and things like that, but they cannot stop this protest tide either. So, and now the sort of best hope is frankly on the international community, on the West, that this combined pressure from the street and from the West may force government to make some concessions on this very controversial issue. So that's where we are right now. Thank you very much.
Professor Gianodia, thank you very much for your insights. And now I would like to ask our last speaker in the panel, Mr. Andrei Popov, to speak about the situation in Moldova. And I would not like to limit your thoughts, but please stay within 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you.
I thought that the best way to get you the flavor of what is Moldova, what it is not, and where it is going, is to tell you a personal story of my 23-year-old daughter, who is now in the Netherlands. And 2 years ago, after graduating from the university over there, and 2 years ago, we looked at her class picture. And she went to one of the good Chisinau schools. And imagine seeing a picture of 32 kids, and then going one by one and saying, this is Canada, France, Germany, Italy, UK. 25 out of 32 are abroad. Last week I went to the countryside, and I went through the market and in southern Moldova. And every youngster, age 20, 22, very few of them I would meet, I ask, tell me how many of your classmates are in Moldova? The average was 3 or 4 out of 25, 30. This gives the feeling of the gravity of the problem and the urgent need to reverse these trends. I'm not political partisan, but I'm not neutral neither. I see and relate to politics and processes in Moldova based on one very simple criteria. Which process, politician, and political development helps reversing these trends, saving Moldova's future, and which trends solidify this status quo system and meaning give no hope for future. Well, this year, over the 2019, Moldovans went through the roller coaster of desperation, hope, and new disappointment. We started this year with a very doom feeling. In February, we had parliamentary elections, which were organized based on the mixed system. Half of members of the parliament, 51, were elected based on the single mandate seats, where money and administrative resources would give competitive edge, and another half, 50, would be elected based on the party list. And we had 3 actors. We had the oligarchs' power party, Democratic Party. It spoke nicely about European values and about the need to save Moldova from an existential pro-Russian threat. But in fact, in its actions, it profanated and discredited very much European values, including by brutally canceling the election results in 2018 when an opposition leader won elections of Chisinau. In the same vein, they launched a smear campaign about opposition leaders and concentrated key resources and control of the key institutions, starting with the Constitutional Court, the Prosecutor General Office, Center for Combating Corruption, and so Audiovisual Council, an immense concentration of resources, literally in the one pair of hands, that of Vlad Plahotniuc, the formal leader of that party, who held no official function, but who in fact ruled the country through the informal system and control over judges, prosecutors, press, and state institutions, which were subordinated to personal corporative interest. Well, this party was kind of in the middle. The second party was the Socialist Party, supported by Russia, which toned down in meantime their tonality regarding European Union, but still were widely perceived in Moldovan society and abroad as best Russian friends in Moldova, who, if would come to power, would try to promote Russian agenda in Moldova. I'm talking about perception. And the third alternative was the union of the two pro-European opposition parties, non-system parties, called NOW. Now is the time. Maia Sandu, the former Minister of Education, the presidential hopeful in 2016, who almost got it because she got 48%. And if it was not the oligarch support for the President Dodon, she would likely have won then in 2016. And she led the opposition bloc. Well, the electoral arithmetic which resulted in that elections in February was the following. In the top is Democratic Party. It got 30 seats. On the right, it's 26. It's the pro-European opposition parties. And here was the Socialist Party of the President of Moldova, Igor Dodon. And because the pro-European opposition party, even before elections, ruled out any coalition with either Democrats or with socialists, everybody more or less expected that the conclusion of coalition building is basically unavoidable, and that the 30 Democrats will unite with 35 socialists and will form a new government which will strengthen the oligarchic rules and extend his grip on Moldova. Well, surprise, due to a number of events, internal dynamic, civil society activists launching, and I was not part of that because I thought it's impossible to achieve, and I was proven wrong. I thought the relations between the oligarch, Vlad Plahotniuc, and President of Moldova are so symbiotic, and the president is so dependent on the oligarch that there is no way he will escape and ally himself with the pro-European opposition. Well, I was proven to be wrong. It happened. Internal and external factors collaborated, and in June, the oligarch was overthrown, and a very unusual coalition of the pro-European forces, 26, and 35 pro-Russian socialists created a new majority, and Maia Sandu, Moldovan pro-European reformist, became prime minister, controlling basically 8 out of the 10 ministries, only with 26 seats in the parliament. It's almost a miraculous outcome. Here I would like to say, because we are talking about Moldova in a wider context, this was for the first time not only in the history of Moldova, this was for the first time in the history of the post-Soviet space, when former erstwhile political enemies, the number one party and the number two, which espoused opposing geopolitical goals, they came together in a governing coalition. It never happened before in Moldova. We always had either pro-Russian, and I once again simplify because there are so many nuances, and Moldova is much more complex and fragmented than I would be able to squeeze in 10, 15 minutes. But basically, this was the dynamic. We had from 1990 to 93 pro-European forces in power and nostalgic pro-Russian in opposition. Then 94 changed the dynamic. Pro-Russians came, and once again, it's not so simple, but just to simplify the perception. Pro-Russian came and pro-European reformists went to opposition. Then in 98, things changed. Then in 2001, communists came to power, landslide 71% in the parliament, and for 8 years we had a mono basically communist system, when pro-European opposition was in the position. And from 2009 to 2019, things changed again, and pro-Europeans, though many of them proved to be quite serious crooks, went to power, and pro-Russians in opposition. This dynamic led to excessive, exaggerated debate about geopolitics. Moldova was blocked in this geopolitical debate. We go east or west, Russia or European Union, Putin or President Basescu, and this was a false debate. In fact, the European integration is not on the agenda today, and for us to qualify for ever seriously talking about European membership, a candidacy, we have to fundamentally transform the country, and for this we have to pull resources together, not polarize the country. And many, those who feel nostalgic about Soviet Union, they want to live in a normal, decent country with functioning institutions, rule of law, good infrastructure, good medical services. So why these people should be ostracized and not pulled together? So when we had this June, as we call, unnatural coalition of pro-Europeans and pro-Russians, it was based on a deal. Let's put aside geopolitics, let's put aside identity and culture politics, which divides us, and focus on what unites us. And there's a hope that we'll be able to break the vicious cycle and show an example. And we had a Prime Minister Maia Sandu for 5 months, just to come forward. She was ousted from power a month ago. And a president who still played like Putin's friend in Moldova, but he, in all honesty, moderated very much his anti-European rhetoric. In fact, he gave it up. He tried without losing pro-Russian supporters in Moldova, and there's a solid 1/3 of Moldovans who favor policies of Moldova coming closer to Russia. And he, without losing them, he moved to the center. He stopped talking about denunciation of association agreement. Instead, President Voronin said, association agreement is our tool for modernization. President Dodon. He said, we have to build Europe in Moldova. He stopped talking about NATO and about the need to close NATO office in Moldova. He stopped talking about Crimea being Russian, and by the contrary, he said he recognizes Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. He stopped advocating closure and banning pro-union with Romanian parties. Instead, he said, Romanians are our brothers. So President Dodon significantly moderated his geopolitical rhetoric and moved to the center. On the other side, Prime Minister Sandu, with her team formed mostly of NGO representatives, politicians who never administrated ministries, mostly well-intended novices in the government. It took several months for them to pull forces together and understand what is going on there. They didn't act like a machine, but they managed to prove that their intentions are serious, and relations with the European Union were unblocked. The European Union started releasing assistance tranches to Moldova. And there is a hope that if this coalition would last for at least a year, till next year presidential elections planned for October or November, then maybe we in Moldova will develop new political culture. We'll try to focus on what unites us, to be pragmatic, to have a real people's agenda, rather than a false geopolitical debate choosing between East or West, which is, once again, so far not on our agenda. Well, this didn't happen, and it didn't happen because this coalition changed. As I was drawing this triangle, I imagined the Rubik's Cube. We are in Budapest, for God's sake. And imagine one corner. One is pink, another one is yellow, another one is blue. This is Moldova. Take away this corner of 3 colors. This is in Moldova. And when I was a kid playing this cubic Rubik, I would almost do, but you know, one corner would not fit. So I would change colors. Well, this happened in Moldova. Moldovan president is a very shrewd political operator. He's in politics for 10 years, and definitely he is power-oriented politician, old type, Soviet type, but extremely disciplined, cunning, maneuvering, double-faced, and for this matter, efficient in Moldovan reality. And in these 5 months, he managed to do an impressive augmentation of power. Judges, Constitutional Court, Center for Combating Crime, while Maia Sandu government would sit in Chisinau and do reforms, he would travel the countryside, go on every week couple of TV interviews, talk behind the scenes, and augment his power base. And now, when he realized that there is a momentum and there is a crossing point, he acted very resolutely. As I said, it took this government several months to understand what's going on, to pull the team together, to attract people. They didn't have people. They didn't have enough people. They fired ministers, fired deputy ministers, but didn't have enough people soon to put in place. Well, towards the end of October, I would feel that they started moving together. They were about to announce a solidarity budget with a lot of social programs. Maia Sandu was about to travel to Moscow. And I think if this would have happened, this would strengthen her and would have prepared her bid for presidential elections. And then we had a debacle about appointment of Prosecutor General. My colleague Iulian Rusu, I'm sure, who knows much more than I on this, will speak in his section. But in fact, Maia Sandu, she feeling that she cannot guarantee that a new Prosecutor General, whom we had to elect for 7 years, will be an independent figure, and feeling that she is being outmaneuvered by President Dodon, who might promote, in spite of the competition, a loyal to him figure, she took the risk, took the responsibility in the government, in the parliament for the new legislation, and failed because socialists teamed up with Democrats. And I didn't mention the oligarch left in June and never came back, and most likely will not come soon. And apparently, oligarch lost a lot of his control in the party. And this is what happened. This is another version of Moldovan political system. Sorry for this improvisation. And this is a chart I designed last year when nothing of this was predictable. In the middle, you have the system of power of Vlad Plahotniuc, the oligarchic system, you know. Top being legitimacy, and this is being power. Here is Igor Dodon. Top legitimacy, for God's sake, he is popularly elected president and a quite popular figure, and so far the most popular Moldovan politician. Maia Sandu is behind, not with a big distance, but still behind. And this is power. So this was a combination when Vlad Plahotniuc had a lot of power, but very little legitimacy, while Igor Dodon had a lot of legitimacy, but very little power. If you look at this geometrical figure, they kind of yin and yang. They are very compatible. Well, here is Acum bloc, Maia Sandu and Andrei Năstase. They said, we will not invite to our ranks people who serve the oligarchic regime, and people who serve the oligarchic regime realized they do not belong here. So these were two incompatible mental systems because, as Vladimir said, this system is based on clan, on informal guarantees, on qui pro quos. You give me loyalty, I give you protection. And this system based on the idealistic thinking that we have to transform Moldova and bring rule of law and not have our own prosecutor general, but have independent prosecutor general and independent judges. So in the last 5 months, once the head of this former oligarchic system of power left somewhere to Miami, or nobody knows exactly where he is, a lot of the elements from the echelon 2, echelon 3, echelon 4 of the former Plahotniuc system of power migrated under the President Dodon's umbrella. And now, once Maia Sandu government was toppled, and the new pro-presidential government of strong professionals in many fields, definitely in finance and foreign affairs, top professionals were appointed, and prime minister is professional himself, who served as Minister of Finance for Plahotniuc government, now the balance of power shifted. In November, a week before the government was toppled, for the first time in the history of Moldova, the elections in the capital Chisinau were won by the socialist representative. Always, since our independence, pro-European reformists ran the city. Many of them proved to be incapable crooks, but at least they were perceived like pro-Europeans. Well, now, a well-prepared guy, but from President Dodon camp, Ivan Cheban, he won city elections in, I would say, free elections. And what helped him very much was exactly this love festival atmosphere, sorry to use this metaphor, when I and many people said, forget about geopolitics, forget about identity politics, let's focus on civic level, let's focus on what unites us. Well, with this kind of atmosphere, pro-European opposition could not use the most efficient tool they used for many electoral cycles in the second round, when pro-European coalition or pro-European candidate launches a negative mobilization campaign and says, don't look at my skills, don't look at substance, don't look at sewage and transportation, look at the fate of the country. The European future of Moldova is at stake. Pro-Russians might win the city, and therefore your moral duty as pro-Europeans to vote for me. And that's how it worked. Well, now, Andrei Năstase, the candidate of ACUM, could not ignite these spirits. He was deprived of these negative mobilization arguments, and he lost. And we are moving towards a new vertical of power. And once again, for the third time, I would say, for the first time in Moldovan history, we have such a control from top down, we don't even realize it. But President, Prime Minister, and Speaker are from the same team. In the cabinet of the Prime Minister, 7 out of 11 ministers are former advisors to President Dodon, who are very loyal to him, who are very servant to him, and who have established quite an informal relations with their patron. So it's President Dodon's government, not socialist government. And for the first time, mayor of Chisinau, where we have 70% of economic activity, is in that team. In that team, with President Dodon, mayor of Chisinau was always from opposition. With President Voronin, 2001, 2009. Now it's different. Socialists control also the mayor of Chisinau. They also control the Bashkan, the leader of the autonomous Gagauzia region. They control more than half of the leadership of the regional councils. And now an increasing share in Moldovan media, up to 40%. Plus, they are well organized, and execution of orders go from top down much sooner than in the former government, where there are many personalities, quarrels, separate opinions, and I have to recognize lack of administrative cohesion. Now, this government operates quite like a machine. Plus, they are led by a very disciplined and efficient political Soviet type, Moldova type, old type political operator, President Dodon, with a lot of resources of very questionable nature, and there are ongoing cases about illegal financing from abroad of the Socialist Party. And this is why an independent prosecutor might be an existential threat to this. But now, last minute, next year, all actions of this government will be subordinated to the goal of ensuring re-election of President Dodon for the second term. And I think, contrary to what many people think, he will try not to give any pretext and motives for opposition to rebel against him, to mobilize pro-European electorate. They learned the lesson. Ion Cheban, socialist candidate, won in Chisinau by promoting an inclusive, non-geopolitical agenda, and I think President Dodon would try the same. He came with this concept, which I personally also like. We should not choose between East and West. Let's promote win-win. and Moldova, and Russia, and the European Union. And at least he speaks about, in parallel, balancing foreign policy with good relations, excellent relations with Russia, where he goes every third week, I think, but also with good relations with the European Union, even with the United States and Romania. And many Moldovans buy this rhetoric because it's natural. We are a small country. Why should we be pawns in geopolitical games? And I think he will try to, keeping his support on the left of the electoral spectrum, to move to the center. While Maia Sandu, who is the only so far political brand capable of beating President Dodon elections, will have to prove that you can be clean and efficient. Clean politicians usually lose, and I recall the Machiavelli phrase who said that when you have two politicians, one a crook and one decent, in spite of them having the same qualities, but the crook can resort to a much wider tool of instruments: money, blackmail, chantage, eavesdropping, lies, and the clean one fights with one hand tied. Well, we'll see. And this is the aspect which I invite you to watch, whether a clean politician, definitely not corrupt and not corruptible, and very rigid and very cold in communication, and this is another thing, whether she has a chance. And it is important to understand that Moldovan youngsters, people who have developed alternative thinking and critical thinking, they look at these elections, and depending on their result, they will decide whether they should reconsider their life choice to leave Moldova for good, and whether Moldova has a chance. And I hope you'll ask some clarification questions, so I'll be able to speak more in my Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Now we still have only 20 minutes. Well, we start a short roundtable discussion, and then you will have some time to ask public questions for our speakers. You talked a lot about internal factors of this year's politics in Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. My first question would be about external factors, starting with the European Union. Okay, sorry. So my first question will be about external factors, starting with the European Union. I would quote an opinion poll from European Union's Neighbours East project. They are preparing opinion polls in 6 Eastern Partnership countries on how do they perceive European Union and Russia and, well, the role of European Union and so on. And in Ukraine, in this year, 2019, 56% of the population was positive about the European Union. The image of European Union was positive. It's quite a big change. 2 years ago, 2017, 43% of the population was positive of European Union. In Moldova, it's a similar change from 2017, 43% to this year, 55%. While in Georgia, 2017, 59% of the population was positive about the European Union, and now it declined to 50%. Well, how would you assess these opinion polls? Is the increase showing a more positive approach to the European Union, to democratic values? And in case of Georgia, what is the decline? Is it because of the pro-Russian vector of the ruling party, or how would you assess this?
Well, first of all, there are fundamental things, and there are things that came back and forth. So fundamentally, Ukrainian population, I think, reoriented from pro-Russian Euro-Asian Union to European Union, or Ukraine being independent, absolutely independent of anything. already in 2014. So now we have only about 15% or, so, or even less people that are pro-Russian. And this will probably remain stable for many years and steadily declining with age and other processes. As concerns the European Union, we have lots of people that have been disappointed in European policies, especially given the Nord Stream 2 and Macron policies about Russia. So I'm afraid that many people have felt betrayed by the European Union because the European Union, some of the European leaders did not give enough support to Ukraine in its struggle with Russia. And I think that it does not directly correlate with European values because in terms of values we have ambiguity, we have at the same time overwhelming majority of people saying that democracy is the best and another overwhelming majority saying that a leader can do a lot for a country and so on and so forth. Now I think they are disappointing in the leader again, and it will come with every new leader they will elect. So steadily, I think that the people who are believing in a leader will eventually take another position, and we will be approaching European values in this sense too.
Okay, I was a little bit surprised by this result of the poll which you mentioned. I didn't know about this poll. In our polls, which are published regularly, usually they are conducted by NDI and IRI, these organizations, their question is usually about support for European integration policies or NATO integration policies, and this support stays quite high. I mean, NATO integration policy supported by more than 70%, European integration policy supported by more than 80%. So, but there are, of course, some other trends which are negative. I think we had, not now, but at least like 5 years ago, the trend that there was also growing support for Eurasian option, so that maybe up to 25% give preference to Eurasian option of Eurasian integration. What is the reason for that? I don't think it's government policy so much. There is, on the one hand, maybe also some disappointment with the West. For instance, the weakness that the West showed in Ukraine with regards to Ukrainian crisis, that shows that Europe is there, but it's not so much for us and not reliable kind of partner in that sense. But there is also much more active work on anti-Western and anti-liberal groups who may be subsidized by Russia, some of them. We cannot prove that, maybe not all of them, but their main message is that Europe, European liberal values are sort of undermining traditional culture, traditional values of Georgian society, and that there are lots of growing number of websites or different organizations who preach those values, so they may also have some influence.
Indeed, over the last year, the number of Moldovans who view favorably European Union increased, but also the number of those who view favorably Russia increased. This is an unexpected result of this unnatural coalition between pro-Russian socialist and pro-European opposition. And sorry, again, I simplify, that they disconnected, antagonistic messages against each other and against their foreign patrons. Plus, Russia played a decisive role, together with the European Union, and of course based on internal context, in ousting Mr. Plakhatniuk from power. So in the last months, opinion polls registered the increase of positive opinion towards European Union, mostly from those people from the left, who before that heard of European Union as an enemy and Russia as a... Now, with President Dodon moving to the middle as well, speaking positively about European Union, these people also embrace this idea. But also, there's a decrease in people who see negatively Russia. And also because pro-European opposition started less frequently poking Russia in the eye and seeing our key enemy and the source of all of our problems is abroad in Russia, and focused more on internal problems. But I have to recall that the highest number of support for European Union was in Moldova in 2008, during the rule of President Voronin. Then we had support of 75%. And this is a result of the fact that in a paternalistic society, when the leader of the tribe from one side, who was elected in 2001 based on the promise to bring Moldova to Russia-Belarus Union and to make Russian the second official language in Moldova and to be the bulk stop against NATO expansion, that's what brought him to power. But then when this leader changes, his electorate follows him. So we had 75%, and basically President Voronin won almost third mandate in April 2009. You know what was his electoral slogan? Let's build European future of Moldova together with Russia, together with Putin. I mean it. Very nice. Who can be against? Russia friend, European Union. So you cover, you expand. And this is what now President Dodon is repeating. He, staying Russia's friend, shows that he is not the West enemy. And this is very appealing for Moldovan centrists in a way. But I'd like to only touch upon a deeper subject here. I personally, though I work in this respect and I make movies, including last week, about why European Union is viewed negatively in certain segments of the of Moldovan society, and this is unfair. Many Moldovans say European Union is an enemy. I've met people who said European Union wants us harm because they think of European Union, because they are nostalgic of the Soviet Union. They felt okay in Soviet Union. They miss Soviet Union. And they think European Union as part of the wider West destroyed Soviet Union. Okay. European Union is the largest donor of Moldova. 70% of Moldovan trade goes to European Union. And this is unfair that so many Moldovans keep staying hostages of this propaganda, manipulative image of the European Union promoted by the Russian press. But for me, most important is not the form, but the substance. I run now and then, and I see people who have a huge European flag and say, we are Europeans, you are the enemy, and who, though being wrapped in the European flag and speaking about European Union integration, in the substance, shallow, they are the showcase of anti-European, intolerant, non-inclusive, misogynistic, homophobic, either you Bolshevik attitude, either you with me or you're my enemy, because European Union is everything, and if you're against European Union, you are the second-rate citizen and you should be sent home. Well, these attitudes should be changed, and I think while thinking about politics, we also have to try to go deeper and to try to alter the fundamental demand in society for new type of leaders, new type of discourse. So for people understand that European Union is about functioning norms, about the justice system, about the fairness, and most importantly, about individual rights. Individual rights are in the center of everything, not the right of my idea, even if this is a European Union. For the sake of promoting European Union, let's eliminate from the political life half of the country. This is not a European Union attitude. How to do this, how to penetrate in deep Moldova is another question.
Thank you. Well, I have many questions for our speakers, but since we have only 7 minutes left in this panel, I believe you also have many questions. So I'd like to open the space for public questions. In the first round, let's collect 3 questions. Please introduce yourself and make a question, not a statement.
Hi, my name is Theo Bash. I'm an American-Hungarian, been here for 30 years. I have 2 questions, you'll forgive me. We Americans always ask for more. Moldova, we talked about the bear, but we're not talking about the elephant in the room, Romania. So 2 minutes, maybe you uncover what is the result of the present Romanian elections and new politics as far as Moldova politics, Moldova situation, and also the ascension to EU. Number 1. Number 2, Ukraine. My wife is Ukrainian, was born there in Karpataya. I go there. I follow Ukraine for 30 years. I go back to Kuchma. Okay? Number 1, Crimea. I just saw a serial called Catherine the Great that covers mainly Potemkin and how Potemkin got Crimea for Russia. Obviously, a political subject. What's the idea? Which way is this going at all? Does Ukraine believe that you'll ever get back Crimea? Is this something that is in a way stopping Ukrainian, not ascension to EU? Even more than that, EU is pissed at the idea of having to have sanctions in Russia because of Crimea, and Ukraine is not guilty at all about the Russians taking over Crimea, which I don't agree. Is Ukraine interested to do a deal like Hong Kong and basically lease Crimea to the Russians and just take it? And I'll stop there.
Do we have any other questions right now? Yeah, the lady in the back.
Thank you. My name is Nina Rusudze. I'm a PhD candidate from Corvinus University. And my question will go to Mr. Nadia about Georgia. You discussed crisis in Georgia, in Georgian government. I respectfully agree with that. But what about the crisis in opposition? Could you elaborate more about that? Because you mentioned only UNM. There is plus European Democrats, the sister party of UNM, plus there is a new Hazaradze movement that can have some perspectives with in future elaboration maybe. But what about the crisis with the grip for Saakashvili? Because he served 2 terms, which should be normal and fine. He does not even hold the Georgian citizenship right now, and even more, he's involved in politics in whole other country in Ukraine. So what is the common sense with there from the side of UNM? And if it can be assumed as a crisis, as a reason for the crisis in the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have 3 questions for 3 of our speakers. Maybe let's start with Andrei.
I lack the necessary experience to be able to maneuver your question in Budapest. And as a matter of rule, I try to avoid talking about sensitive, complex issues which touch upon identity in abroad. I'm fine with this in Moldova. But as for Romania, I would propose you the following angle. For many years, the Romanian government was run by the Social Democratic Party. Its former leader now is in prison and on the blacklist, forbidden to enter US, Mr. Dragnea. And they had a very good relations with our oligarch. And our oligarch was personal friend with Petro Poroshenko. And both Romanian Social Democrats and Petro Poroshenko managed to convince American friends back in 2016 that Plahotniuc might be a crook, but he stands against Russia and he is reliable and he can keep European option in Moldova. Let's support for this. And this decision undermined many Moldovans' faith in Europe and in value-based Western world. Now, in Romania, we saw a double change. Well, First, the socialist government was ousted from power on November the 4th. The new government led by Ludovic Orban, who is only 6 days older than Viktor Orban, but this is a different story. Yes. May 1963, I think, both of them. He is a big friend with Moldovan opposition. He has no personal connection and investment in former oligarch. And then President Iohannis was re-elected. And now Romania, I think, will be in the forefront within European Union. And the first indication was the very bold press release after the meeting of Moldovan foreign minister with Romanian foreign minister in Bratislava on the margins of the OSCE ministerial council. And Romania will try to, it's obvious, to convince and generate the critical mass within the European Union. And the ground is quite fertile in most of the countries and in Brussels, that we should significantly limit, EU should significantly limit support for the Moldovan Dodon-led government, because he will instrumentalize it and win in presidential election. And this is an interesting game. I am confident that Russia will not ask of President Dodon any bold moves on Transnistria, on identity, on against the EU, because he needs to win. Once he wins, very possibly in elections, the game might be different. So I think Romania will try to convince the European Union that we have to be attentive and not contribute to Dodon winning and then promoting Russian agenda after, even though now his rhetoric is almost flawless regarding the European Union. There are very few things you can reproach to President Dodon or Prime Minister Kiku, is the way they speak about European Union. And my question, bigger question, is who will win within European Union? Now, I think so far tough line is winning. People have said not isolate, but limit the support for the new government. But there are other people who are pragmatic and who are afraid not to push Dodon too much in Russian hands, to give him the alternative. Let's socialize. Let's give him alternatives. Let's bring him to the West. Let's not stop assistance because he might be a Moldovan, centrist politician. And I would stop here.
Okay, I was asked about crisis, and maybe I did need to somehow define more clearly what I meant about crisis and crisis of what. I don't think there is clearly crisis of government, of Georgian Dream. They lost during the year, I guess we tried to count with Eka and Taxi, but more than 25 MPs this year, but they had more than 75% majority out of 150 members, so they still have comfortable majority, and there is no crisis there. But there is crisis of the political system, on crisis of trust, and crisis of relations between, democratic system, you have government opposition who recognize each other's legitimacy. But now we have a system where government does not recognize legitimacy of the opposition, they call them criminals, but opposition also does not recognize legitimacy of government, basically, and does not want to work in parliament, so on. So that's the essence of crisis. I don't think there is crisis of opposition. Opposition is there. There are just fundamental weaknesses of the opposition. That's another point. That's probably what you had meant. Okay, opposition, as you mentioned, the two largest parties are UNM and European Georgia, and European Georgia in a splinter group of UNM. So European Georgia are those mostly leaders, former leaders of UNM, who don't accept personalistic leadership of Saakashvili. So that was really the dividing line. But from the point of view of average voters, they are both UNM. So, and that's some kind of problem, that either you stick to Georgian Dream or you go back to UNM in different ways. And there have been this talk about the so-called third force. We need third force, somebody third. But that becomes sort of mythological, because if there is such a demand for the first force, why is it that it never materialized? And there have been many different attempts to create this third force. This Hazaradze group is one of those. There are some others, or have been others, but still these third ones they have rating like 2%, 3% at the best. So that's a problem that I think most people don't want Georgian Dream. I think majority does not want Georgian Dream anymore, but they cannot agree on whom they want. There is, again, solid support for these two parties, but again, not very far from majority, and there are these people in between who are kind of confused. They say we don't like either of those, but they cannot say whom they like and whom they would want to, and that's not crisis, but that's how it has been for the last 7 years. That's our normal condition, let's say, so for the opposition. And Saakashvili is, of course, a very controversial figure. I think it was his grave mistake to try to play on two fields, to become opposition leaders in both Ukraine and Georgia. I think it's quite unprecedented in the world, and I think now he plays negative and destructive game in Ukrainian politics and in Georgian politics. But Ukrainian politics, he became very marginal figure, of course. Now in Georgia, he's not marginal figure, but he is basically, he believes that Ivanishvili will not live through elections, which may be true, I don't know. But so he thinks that there should be some kind of a new Maidan style change, which I don't see happening either. He is kind of paradoxically unifying figure for the government. If government has anything to unify, there are two things: Ivanishvili's money and Misha's hatred. So that's what unifies government at this point.
Let me comment that Ukrainian experience testifies that a third force can emerge abruptly, like in overheated water. And to your question about Crimea, I would say that first of all, from the point of international law or international justice, we will never recognize Crimea being Russian, and no sane people in the world will recognize Crimea being Russian. But from the operational viewpoint, I would say that this question is far beyond the horizon of any forecasts, because as of now, Ukraine have actually lost the war with some losses, but it was inevitable because Russia is much stronger, and Russia remains much stronger in spite of the fact that Ukrainian army has strengthened and so on. But Ukrainian army is strong enough to make any Russian military invasion not a journey. But still, it is not strong enough to beat a Russian army and to expel it from even from Donbass, not to mention Crimea. Crimea is also, if you look at the map, it is very hard to intervene Crimea from the Ukrainian territory. So I think that we can only wait until something will happen to Russia. And I personally think that after Putin, Russia will have another, what they call smuta, a mess within the country without a strong leader. Russia can hardly survive without a strong leader. And there is no successor to Putin, and Putin will hardly prepare a successor for himself. So there is a chance that it will work like in Croatia with Srpska Krajina. When Serbia became weaker, Croatians took it back. Maybe this is just a dream. Ukraine will be once also able to take it back. But this all is much beyond the horizon of our today's expectations, because Now we have, right today we have decisive day, and right tomorrow we will see if Ukraine will at all sustain in this fight. The whole struggle is now like in a position of war. Who will fail first? If Ukraine will fail first, then Russia will take Crimea forever, and probably part of Ukraine will become a sort of buffer state between the West and Russia. If Ukraine manage to sustain, then if Russia fails, Ukraine can gain back all of the losses of this war.
Thank you very much. And on this note, I would like to thank you for your attention and thank our speakers for providing sharing their knowledge with you. Big applause for them, please. Now we have a short 10 minutes break and we'll continue with the second panel, 11:30.